At her graduation, she laughed and said, "You're useless." I stood up and walked out, quietly, without a word. That's how it happened. And before I take you through every detail of how we got there, make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment with what you think. Because some people will hear this and say I was weak, others will say I was strong. I want to know where you stand. Her name is Rachel, my wife of nearly 12 years. And let me tell you, for those 12 years I lived with one mission, to see her succeed. I worked nights, I worked weekends, I worked jobs I hated just to make sure she had everything she needed. Rachel had this dream of finishing college late in life, proving to herself and to everyone else that she could do it. And I believed in her, more than she believed in herself sometimes. While her classmates were 10 years younger, I told her age didn't matter. While bills piled up, I took double shifts to cover tuition. When she cried at the dining table with textbooks open, I made her coffee and stayed up with her, even if I had to be up at dawn for work. There were nights I came home so tired my hands shook from holding a wrench all day, but I still sat down beside her and quizzed her for exams. There were weeks when I skipped buying new shoes or fixing my old truck because the money had to go toward her books. Every time she doubted herself, I told her she was brilliant. Every time she thought of quitting, I reminded her why she started. And when she finally began to believe, I felt proud, like my sacrifices meant something. Graduation day came and I thought, this is it. This is the reward for everything. The auditorium was packed, families everywhere in their best clothes, balloons, flowers, cheers filling the air. I wore the one suit I owned, pressed it the night before so it looked halfway decent. I found a seat near the front, heart pounding like I was the one about to get a diploma. When they called her name, Rachel Miller, I leapt to my feet and clapped so hard my palms stung. She walked across that stage in her cap and gown, smiling, radiant, diploma in hand. And in that moment I thought, she's finally there, and I helped her get there. Afterward, there was a reception, tables lined with food, people laughing and hugging, proud parents snapping pictures. I walked up to her while she was surrounded by her classmates and some professors. I leaned close, just enough so only she could hear, and I whispered, "I'm so proud of you. Every year, every sacrifice, it was all worth it to see you shine right now." And that's when she did it. Rachel threw back her head, laughed loud enough for everyone to hear, turned to her friends, and said, "This guy? He's useless. If it weren't for me, no one would even notice him. He has nothing of his own." They laughed with her. A chorus of cruel little chuckles, like it was the funniest thing in the world. And I stood there, my face burning, my chest tight, the weight of 1,000 late nights and double shifts crashing down. All those years I carried her dream on my back, and in front of everyone she reduced me to a joke, less than a man, less than a person. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the drink in my hand. I didn't demand she take it back. I sat down slowly, letting the laughter ring in my ears, letting the humiliation sink deep. Then I rose to my feet. No one even noticed at first. I straightened my jacket, looked at her one last time while she still laughed, and I walked out of that hall. Quietly, without a word. When I walked out of that auditorium, I felt like the air outside was both lighter and heavier than anything I had breathed in years. The late afternoon sun was shining on the campus lawn. Families were taking pictures. Kids were running around with balloons. And I stood there in the middle of it all feeling like the world had just tilted sideways. My hands were shaking, not from rage, but from something deeper, something that cut past anger and settled into a kind of hollow silence. For 12 years, I had poured myself into Rachel's dream. I had paid for the tuition when money was tight. I had cheered her on when she doubted herself. I had given her every ounce of support a husband could give. And in one moment, one cruel laugh, she had taken all that devotion and twisted it into a punchline. I kept walking across the parking lot, past families hugging their graduates, past fathers holding up their phones to record their daughters smiling with diplomas in hand. I wondered if anyone else there knew what it felt like to give everything you had only to be told in front of strangers that you were nothing. I got to my car and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard. I couldn't bring myself to turn the key just yet. Instead, I thought about all the nights Rachel had sat at that same kitchen table, crying over assignments, and how I had rubbed her shoulders, told her she was capable, told her she was stronger than she believed. I thought about the extra shifts I picked up, the calluses that split on my hands, the way my back ached when I got home, but I never let it stop me from quizzing her for exams. Every one of those moments played in my head and collided with the sound of her laugh, the look on her face when she dismissed me like I was a piece of trash. The contrast was so sharp it nearly made me dizzy. Eventually, I started the car and pulled out of the lot, driving without any direction in mind. The radio was on, but I couldn't hear a word of it, just noise humming under the roar of thoughts pounding in my skull. I passed diners, gas stations, storefronts, all blurry shapes sliding by. I thought about calling a friend, but what could I even say? That my wife, the woman I'd given my best years to, had just spit on me in front of everyone she knew? That she thought I was useless after all the times I carried her when she couldn't carry herself? The words stuck in my throat, unspeakable, so I kept driving. I ended up at a park a few miles away, a place we used to visit when we were younger, before the long nights of studying, before the bills stacked up, back when life still felt full of promise. I parked under a tree and just sat there, staring at the pond where kids tossed breadcrumbs to ducks. I remembered Rachel and I walking hand in hand around that pond, dreaming out loud about the life we wanted, the home we'd build, the adventures we'd take. We were kids ourselves back then, but we had believed in each other. I wondered where that belief had gone, when it had turned into contempt. Maybe it had been eroding slowly, one sarcastic comment at a time, one ungrateful shrug after another, until it culminated in that cruel joke at her graduation. Or maybe she had always seen me as a placeholder, a man to carry her until she didn't need carrying anymore. The longer I sat there, the more I realized that silence had been the right answer. If I had shouted back, if I had tried to defend myself, it would have given her more power. She wanted me small, wanted me humiliated, wanted me beneath her so she could stand taller in front of her friends. By walking away without a word, I denied her that satisfaction. But the realization didn't take away the sting. My chest felt tight with a mixture of betrayal and emptiness. How do you rebuild yourself when the person you trusted most tears you down in front of everyone? How do you reclaim your worth when the one you sacrificed for decides to strip it away in public? I watched the sun dip lower in the sky, the orange light spreading across the water, and I thought about the years I had lost. Dreams I had set aside, hobbies abandoned, opportunities turned down because they didn't fit with Rachel's schedule or her needs. I had convinced myself it was love, that love meant sacrifice, but maybe it was something else. Maybe it was blindness. Maybe it was a refusal to see that love without respect is just a slow drain that empties you until there's nothing left. Sitting there in that park, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, a desire to stop draining myself for someone who didn't care if I ran dry. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. I didn't know how I would face Rachel when she came home from celebrating with her friends. But I knew one thing with certainty. Something had shifted inside me that could never shift back. I had walked out quietly, but that silence carried a promise. A promise that I would no longer stand in the shadow of someone who saw me as useless. I didn't say the words out loud, but in my heart I had already begun to pull back the support that had defined our marriage. For the first time in over a decade, I thought about what it would mean to live for myself. I drove home that evening with the weight of silence sitting heavy in the car, heavier than any words could have been. When I walked through the front door, the house looked the same as it always did, the same framed pictures on the wall, the same books stacked on the coffee table, the same faint smell of the lavender candles Rachel loved to burn. Yet it all felt unfamiliar, almost foreign, like I was stepping into a museum of a life that no longer belonged to me. I set my keys down on the counter and sat in the dark living room without turning on a light. The shadows stretched across the walls as the sun disappeared completely, and for the first time I realized how many years I had spent in this very room waiting for her, supporting her, giving her the space and comfort she needed while my own needs stayed buried. Now the silence wasn't comforting. It was deafening. Rachel came home late, her laughter carrying into the hallway before she even opened the door. I heard the jingle of her keys, the rustle of her gown as she kicked off her heels, and the excited chatter of her voice on the phone with someone, probably one of her classmates. She was still riding the high of the evening, oblivious to the storm she had left behind in me. I stayed in the living room, sitting motionless while she walked past, not even noticing me at first. She went into the kitchen, clattering glasses, humming to herself, and I felt my jaw tighten. She had no idea what her words had done. Or worse, maybe she did and didn't care. When she finally saw me, she smiled, as if nothing had happened. "You left early," she said casually, like I had just stepped out to smoke a cigarette or take a call. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw a woman who had once been the center of my universe, but who now felt like a stranger standing in my kitchen. I didn't answer right away, and she frowned. "What's with you?" she asked, her tone sharp and patient. I could have told her exactly what was with me. I could have told her how her laughter had sliced me open in front of everyone, how I had stood there drowning in humiliation while she basked in the spotlight. But I didn't. Instead, I said quietly, "I heard what you said." For the first time that night, she hesitated. Just a flicker. Her eyes darted away, then back. "Oh, come on," she said, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. "It was a joke. Don't be so sensitive. You know I didn't mean it like that." But the problem was she did mean it. You don't laugh like that, with your whole body, your whole face lit up, unless there's truth behind the words. I sat there in silence, watching her shift uncomfortably, watching her try to plaster over the cracks with excuses. Every second that passed made something inside me harden. For years I had been her foundation, her safety net, her cheerleader. And she had called me useless in the moment she should have acknowledged me the most. The days that followed felt like moving through water. I went to work, came home, ate dinner, but everything was muted. Rachel was still celebrating, still fielding calls from friends and professors, still posting pictures online of her in her gown, captioning them with words about hard work and perseverance. My name was nowhere in those captions. My presence was invisible in those photos. And I realized she had always intended it that way. I had been the scaffolding, the invisible structure that held her up until the building was complete, and now that she had her diploma, she was ready to strip the scaffolding away and pretend it had never been there. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the chances I had given up. There was a time I wanted to start my own business, a small garage where I could work on cars the way my father taught me, but the money went to her classes instead. There was a time I wanted to take a trip, just the two of us, but she said we couldn't afford it because she needed new software for school. There was a time I thought about going back to school myself, but she said one degree in the family was enough for now. I told myself it was worth it because her success was our success. But lying there in the dark, I realized it had only ever been hers. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Support is a gift, not a contract. It should be acknowledged, respected, even cherished. But Rachel had twisted it into entitlement. She believed my sacrifices were simply what she deserved. And when someone believes they are entitled to everything you give, they will never see the value of what they've taken. That was the hardest truth to swallow. It wasn't that she had forgotten my support. It was that she never valued it in the first place. One evening, I came home late from work and found her sitting on the couch with friends, laughing and drinking wine. The same laugh, the same dismissive tone, only now it wasn't about me. It was about someone else, another easy target for her sharp tongue. I stood in the doorway watching her, the people around her nodding, laughing along, and I realized she thrived on cutting others down. It made her feel bigger. For years I had been her easiest target because I never fought back. But something in me had shifted at that graduation, and I wasn't the same man anymore. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed. The noise from downstairs carried faintly through the walls, but I let it fade into the background. In that moment, I made a quiet decision, one I didn't even speak out loud to myself. I decided that if she thought I was useless, then she would learn what her life looked like without my support. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with silence, with absence, with the steady withdrawal of the foundation she had always taken for granted. The first time I truly withdrew my support, it was so small she didn't even notice. Rachel had left a stack of bills on the counter like she always did, expecting me to handle them as I always had. I walked past them without touching a single envelope. Days later, when the lights flickered because the payment was late, she frowned, annoyed, but assumed it was a mistake from the company. I said nothing. Another week, and the internet service was cut for an evening. She cursed at the router, called the provider, and when they told her the bill was overdue, I heard her laugh nervously, embarrassed. Still, I said nothing. It wasn't about revenge, not at first. It was about letting the reality sink in that the invisible net she had always relied on was no longer there to catch her. At work, my coworkers started to notice a difference in me. I wasn't dragging myself in exhausted anymore, running on fumes because of late nights tutoring her or picking up extra hours for tuition. I began to clock out on time, go home, and spend the evenings on things I wanted. I dusted off an old toolbox, started working on cars in the garage again, the way my father taught me when I was a boy. The smell of motor oil and the sound of an engine turning over filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Slowly, I began to see pieces of myself that had been buried under her ambitions. Rachel, meanwhile, grew more restless. She had her diploma now, but the job offers weren't rolling in the way she expected. She complained about interviews, about people not recognizing her value, about how the world was unfair. I listened politely at first, but inside I remembered every time she had dismissed me, every sacrifice she had taken for granted. There was no fire in me to lift her up again. She had called me useless, and in doing so she had severed the bond that made me want to fight for her. When she sighed late at night and said, "I just wish you could do more to help me," I simply turned over in bed and closed my eyes. Weeks passed, and the cracks widened. She began to notice the groceries didn't magically refill the fridge, the car maintenance didn't take care of itself, the rent check wasn't mailed until she wrote it. She asked me directly one evening, "Why aren't you doing the things you used to?" I looked at her calmly, and for the first time I said what I had been holding back. "Because you told me I'm useless, and I decided to stop proving you wrong." The silence that followed was thick, heavier than any argument we had ever had. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. For once, Rachel had no quick remark, no dismissive laugh. The shift was permanent. I stopped investing my energy into her life and poured it into mine. I joined a local car club, started meeting people who shared my passion. I picked up side jobs fixing engines, cash in hand, and with every job completed, I felt more alive. My evenings were no longer spent hovering over her textbooks, but over carburetors and brake lines. Work that left my hands black with grease, but my spirit clean. I remembered who I was before I gave everything away. Rachel tried to regain my attention with small gestures. She cooked dinner once or twice, complimented me half-heartedly, but it was too late. I had seen the truth behind her smile, heard the contempt in her laugh. Gratitude cannot be faked once it has been shredded. The more she tried to pretend, the clearer it became that she was only reaching out because she missed the support, not because she valued me. That distinction mattered more than anything. One night, she asked me to come to a dinner with her classmates to celebrate again, this time in a nicer restaurant. I declined. She looked stunned, as if it had never occurred to her I could say no. "But they'll expect you to be there," she argued. I shook my head. "They'll be fine without me. You told them who I was already." The words hit harder than I intended, but they were true. She had made her opinion of me clear in front of them, and I wasn't going to play the part of her silent prop any longer. In the weeks that followed, the distance between us grew until it felt like we were living in two separate houses. And maybe we were. She spent her time chasing validation from others, while I spent mine rebuilding a life I had abandoned. The more I withdrew, the more I realized how much of myself had been lost. And with every mile I put between me and her needs, I discovered strength I thought was gone forever. Looking back, the night of her graduation wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The moment her laughter cut through me, I thought she had broken me for good. But walking out quietly was my first act of reclaiming myself. It was the seed of a new life, one where my worth wasn't defined by how much I could give to someone who never appreciated it. My silence was the loudest thing I had ever said, and it echoed into every choice I made afterward. So if you've listened this far, let me leave you with this. Sometimes the people we love most will strip us down to nothing if we let them. Sometimes the only way to survive is to walk away without a word, to withdraw your support, and watch them realize what you really meant to their life. I learned that the hard way. If you've ever been in that place, if you've ever been told you were useless when you gave everything, you know exactly what I mean. Make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Would you have walked out like I did? Or would you have stayed and fought? I want to hear your stories, because I know I'm not the only one.